Sign yourself out. Today is the 5th. Okay. Let's go in. Open up turn on your clickers, please.
What are these notes?
Imperialism?
So they're continued?
Yes. Except for the stuff on the Philippine annexation, which sort of are isolated. Okay?
Powering down.
All right. So what I want you guys to do is to answer this question. This question here. Okay? What I'd like you to do is answer this question. To justify their policies, the new American expansionists of the 1800s offered all of the following reasons except A, strong nations were destined by natural law to dominate the weak ones. B, the U.S. should try to create a community of nations to guarantee world peace. C, a strong navy was the key to becoming a great nation, and colonies would serve as bases for such a navy. D, the U.S. had a duty to spread its superior institutions to less civilized people. Three, two, one, and 0. Here we go. And wow, no one really knows. Okay? The answer is B. Okay? Let's look at this one by one. The number one answer was C. A strong navy was one of the keys. That's what Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote about in his book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. The next answer was number A, letter A. Strong nations were designed by natural law. That's just another way of saying what term, what concept? Social Darwinism. So that's one of the reasons, okay? And the next one was the U.S. had a duty to spread its superior institutions to less civilized people. That refers to what poem? The White Man's Burden, okay? So the U.S., one of the things that this unit, it's titled Imperialism. Imperialism isn't about creating things like the United Nations, okay? Creating international institutions that show everyone getting along. All right, so we're going to be going on to now is Hawaii, okay? And Hawaii is a group of islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Now, what is the race or the ethnicity of the people who are native to Hawaii called? Polynesians, okay? And these folks, the Polynesians, came to Hawaii in one of the most amazing human migrations ever in world history. Using outrigger canoes. They travel from what would be Malaysia and Indonesia, going island by island, slowly over many generations, with not even really ocean-worthy vessels. And they populate all of these various islands here in the Pacific, including Hawaii. The furthest eastern island that they settle is called Easter Island. You might have heard of Easter Island because it's that island with those huge carved heads that face toward the west, where their ancestors came from. Easter Island is a really interesting story because it used to be a very vibrant, lush ecology there, but the people who settled it, the Polynesians who settled it, cut down all of the trees on Easter Island. When they cut the trees, it eroded the soil, and all of the people on the island died slowly over time of starvation. It's one of the first examples of man actually killing itself off because it wasn't taking care of the environment. So when the Spanish got to Easter Island, which is now today owned by the nation of Chile, they said, oh my God, this mystery people, these mystery people built these huge stone heads. I wonder what happened to them. And now, archaeologists have determined that they killed themselves off through not taking care of their environment. Now, Hawaii was never colonized by a European country. It was discovered by a man named Thomas Cook, Captain Cook, who was British, but it was never actually colonized. That is until the 1870s, when Americans become some of the major landowners in Hawaii. The original people who came to Hawaii from the United States were missionaries. And what is a missionary? Jacob. Right, it's someone who spreads religion. And here is one of the oldest structures in Hawaii that's still standing, okay? It is a Congregationalist church. The Congregationalists were the people who originally founded New England. And these folks came over to Hawaii to try to convert the native Polynesian people to Protestant Congregationalism. One of the people that originally settled there is a man by the name of Stanford Dole. And what Stanford Dole realized is that there was a lot more money to be made in agriculture and in agricultural products. So he begins a fruit company that I'm sure you've all heard of, called Dole. And the other folks in Hawaii, these other Americans, start sugar plantations. What ends up happening to the native Hawaiian people is that they begin, much like the Native American people here in North America, they begin to die off due to exposure to disease from Europe. So the Americans who had set up these plantations in Hawaii, they have to go and send out for cheap labor. And they import that labor from Japan and China. Now the main crop that they are working on is sugar. Sugar is sugar cane. And it is an incredibly labor-intensive kind of crop to create. At the same time, the United States government acquires a naval base that they had negotiated with the Queen of Hawaii in 1887. In 1887, the U.S. gets the rights to Pearl Harbor Naval Base. This is a picture of Pearl Harbor at the time that the United States acquired it from the Hawaiian monarchy. It looks very, very different today. Have any of you ever been to Hawaii? It's one of my places I'd love to check off on my list of being able to go. Now, why was Hawaii important strategically for the United States? What do you think? Yeah, Steph?
Well, isn't it closer to like China and Japan, so that way it's easier for them to like put troops there so that they don't have to waste as much time to go over?
Yeah, it's a strategic location close to Asia, okay? And yeah, it's helpful to have a military base there so you can project your military power into Asia. But let's take a look at how ships actually travel. AJ?
Wait, where's Hawaii?
Hawaii is right here.
Wow, it's so far away.
It is. It's I think Hawaii is about an 8 or 9 hour difference from Massachusetts.
It's like
We are closer to England than we are to Hawaii.
No, it's 6 hours.
It's 6 hours? Let's see. They don't have the time zones on this.
That's so.
So this is like this part of, there's like 2 time zones in Alaska. Oh wait, you know why? Because Alaska is further east than Hawaii. If you look at it, Alaska is like right about by New Zealand. It goes that far. Okay. The reason why we needed Hawaii is because of steamship travel. Boats during this time are fueled by coal and water. And you need naval bases so that these ships can take on coal and water. That's the main strategic importance of Hawaii, even though it had a sugar economy. Now, at that time, there's a queen. Her name is Queen Liliuokalani. And she is the last queen of Hawaii. She realizes that all these Americans are eroding her power and her authority. And she's concerned about it. And she begins a campaign that she calls Hawaiian Lands in Hawaiian Hands. And that is actually what is really going on in Hawaii today. If you were to ask me to name the most difficult place to be white in the United States, I would say Hawaii would be that place. Yeah. The people, the native Hawaiian people, dislike whites to a great extent. I have a friend, he used to teach here. His name was Richie Herbst. Maybe you've had him or knew of him, okay? He was a shorter, dark-haired teacher, beard. Yeah. Yeah, he did. Okay. Well, he lived in Hawaii, and he used to tell me crazy stories about his treatment in Hawaii. He was a dishwasher at a Hawaiian restaurant, and when he biked home, they'd say, "White boy, go home," and they'd throw rocks at him, and it was really tough. But he hated Hawaii. He hated living there because of in his opinion, the racism of the Hawaiian people. Now, how did they get that way? They got that way because their land was taken from them by Americans. And Queen Liliuokalani wanted to end that. So, the Americans, though, the rich Americans, like Stanford Dole, they wanted to get rid of Queen Liliuokalani. Because what she was kind of promising was a sort of socialism. That if she was successful in being able to kick out all of the Americans, she would redistribute the land back to the native Hawaiian people. Well, whenever you have a naval base, that means you have what group of U.S. military personnel? Besides sailors. No, they're not till later, but close. The United States Marines, okay? So the Marines at Pearl Harbor are ordered to overturn and overthrow the native Hawaiian government, allegedly to protect, that's called a pretext, allegedly to protect American interests there. So as a result, Queen Liliuokalani is the last queen of Hawaii, and the United States annexes Hawaii and takes the land from the native Hawaiian people. Are there any questions about that one? So it isn't as if the Hawaiian people made a conscious decision to join with the U.S. They were forced by the United States Marines and essentially conquered by the United States Marines.
Was it mainly just for those, like, sugar?
For the sugar plantations and to make sure that we had continuous access to that base in Pearl Harbor. Yeah, Marilyn.
So like, do not a lot of actual people like who aren't native to Hawaii in Hawaii, is it mostly just natives who live there for some reason?
Well, how you define native Hawaiian is really tough, okay?
Polynesian.
Because mainly, well, there's very few real Polynesians who live in Hawaii because many of them died off, okay? But the people that they consider are native Hawaiian are a mix of Polynesian, Chinese, and Japanese laborers who worked on these plantations. But
Is it mostly that population that lives in
It is. Whites, I think, constitute like 11 or 12% of the population in Hawaii. Any of you ever watched that show, Dog the Bounty Hunter? Yeah. Honolulu's different, you know. Honolulu's the whitest city in Hawaii. It's about 40% white.
Is that what it was, that like people live in Hawaii and all that?
Yeah. If you were white and on one of those small islands, it would be really awkward. Hey, sure. But it's also you know who else is Hawaiian? President Obama is also Hawaiian. It's even tougher to be black and Hawaiian. What?
He's Hawaiian.
He's Hawaiian.
We're all
He's born in Honolulu.
So he's not like, I mean, wasn't his like mom?
His mom is from Kansas, okay, and his father is from Kenya. Her mom was a graduate student at the University of Hawaii. She hooked up with this guy from Kenya. She had a baby out of wedlock, and Barack Obama was born to her. She was, because everyone
So he was
knows
listening.
it.
I don't know it.
So how is he Hawaiian if they're none
He's not native Hawaiian, but in the United States, if you're born in a state, that means you're of that state. Okay, but his mom was a real flake. He had kind of a tough childhood. His mom said, "Yeah, I don't feel like taking care of the kid," and so she shipped him off to Kansas to live with her parents. Spent the first 7 years of his life with his grandparents, who were both white in one of the whitest states in the Union. And then eventually mom breezes back into his life and says, "Hey, I want my kid back." And the grandparents say, "All right, well, what are you going to do with him?" "Oh, we're moving to Indonesia. I got a new husband." And then she moved off to Indonesia, and he lived there for 5 years. And then she eventually got tired of being a mom again, and then he went back to live with his grandparents. Yeah, he had kind of a tough life, yeah.
So did he like not know his dad at all?
He never met his father. But he did meet he went to Kenya once to meet his dad's family. Never met his actual dad.
Is his dad still alive?
No, his dad died.
What were all those rumors about like his dad when he went downstairs and they know?
His dad was a Muslim, but his parents are committed Christian, so his grandparents, so he was raised in a Christian home, so he is a Christian. But he goes to a black Christian church in Chicago. Yeah. You didn't know this stuff?
Does he fly there?
This what?
Does he fly there?
No, he goes to a black church in Washington. There's lots of black people in Washington, so that's easy. You didn't know that?
No, but why would you say just said he's Chicago?
Well, no, she asked, because his church is it's called an African Methodist church.
Yeah.
Okay? So it isn't like you can be in Holden and go to an African Methodist church. They're not everywhere in the United States.
Would you like not go to an African Methodist church if you weren't black?
I did once. It was kind of neat. I felt odd, but I went with my friend.
I want to go to one.
A Christian church that I want to go to someday, for just out of curiosity's sake. Have you ever heard of COPS? COPTS?
No.
They're the Christians of Egypt, and they practice an ancient form of Christianity that's remained largely unchanged for the past 2,000 years. I'd like to check out one of their services.
Where is it?
There's one in Framingham.
What do they do?
What are they? Yeah. What is
I don't know. That's why I want to go,
What is
James.
it called again?
Coptic.
Like
COPT. I see. What's that? I would die? I don't think so. No. Oh my God. You guys have really the worst attitude. All right. So moving on to our next subject. Why care about Cuba? And the number one reason is sugar. The biggest landowner in Cuba at the time of the Cuban-Spanish conflict is Coca-Cola, who gets most of their sugar from Cuban-made sugar. James? Is your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. I just saw it like that. All right. Now, at the time of the late 1800s, there is a revolution going on in Cuba. The native Cuban people want to be independent and free. The Cuban people are fighting a war against their colonial rulers in Spain. How is it like the American Revolution? Is it like the American Revolution? Marilyn?
Well, because like we're fighting, like we're not fighting ourselves, we're fighting like someone who's like kind of far away from us.
Yeah, like Cuba? Yeah, Liz? They're both fighting for freedom, okay. Now in our case, we were founded by English people and then eventually we decided to separate. Cuba was founded by Spanish people and then they decided to separate. So there is a lot in common. But the United States is concerned. They think that Spain doesn't really have the ability to keep down an insurgency. And so many Americans are thinking, well, maybe we should get rid of the Spanish and let there be a Cuban government that we could control. There were other reasons for supporting the war, and you see this picture here of Theodore Roosevelt in his military uniform. Theodore Roosevelt and a lot of Americans at the time thought of the war in this sense. You know, it's been about 40 years since the Civil War. And people like Roosevelt thought that American men needed to fight wars to prove their manhood and to prove their worth as men. And if they don't fight in wars and in combat, what that means is they might become, in a sense, sissies. So Roosevelt was one of the people who strongly pushed for war, feeling like it could help out American manhood and American masculinity. But the other important factor pushing for war is something called yellow journalism. What's yellow journalism? Yellow journalism describes a kind of tabloid journalism. Does anyone know what tabloid journalism is, or what a tabloid is? Have any of you ever read the New York Post, or the New York Daily News, or the Boston Herald? Tabloids are small, sensationalistic newspapers with eye-catching headlines designed to appeal to people who are not going to be interested in a more intellectual newspaper like the New York Times. One thing to understand about the 19th century is that newspapers are pretty much it for media. There is no internet. There is no TV. There is no radio. There aren't even movie theaters. The only thing that there is are newspapers. So when you talk about any kind of media at all, it really is just newspapers. Yellow journalism describes newspapers that had this cartoon character in it. His name is the Yellow Kid. The Yellow Kid is the first color cartoon strip in world history. He wore a yellow nightshirt. And the Yellow Kid was really a dumb kind of comic strip. It was not funny at all. I would show you examples of the Yellow Kid, but there's no point to it. But any newspaper in which the Yellow Kid appeared got the nickname the Yellow Press because it was in color. Two important newspaper publishers, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, are engaged in a press war. Does anyone know what a press war is? Marilyn?
Well, it's not like don't you just get like journalists who just trying to get like a better story or trying to get like the top news
To scoop the other side, right? And so one guy comes up with an idea. His name is Joseph Pulitzer. What would be better for circulation than a war? Everybody who reads newspapers would be interested in a good war. but it has to be a war that you can win. No one wants to read about a sad war. People want to read about a successful war. So William Randolph Hearst sends an illustrator, Joseph Remington. You might have seen some of his paintings on the Old West. And he said to him, paint me pictures. Show me pictures of Spanish atrocities against the Cubans, and I will whip up anti-war sentiment. And war is good for selling newspapers. Now, have you ever heard of the name Pulitzer before? Where, Cam?
I don't know, I feel
Like Lily
like,
Pulitzer?
What's that?
Like Lily Pulitzer?
There's a Lily Pulitzer? Oh, at this school?
No, like a store.
Oh, no, it's not from that. Carly? There's the Pulitzer Prize. That is the award given to the best journalist in the United States each and every year. Well, Pulitzer's successful in changing a lot of attitudes toward the Spanish. So the United States government sends a battleship. This battleship is called the USS Maine. They send the Maine to Havana Harbor, mainly as a way of showing American power and influence in the area. The United States was concerned about how the Spanish were treating the Cuban people, and they were trying to get the Spanish to find a peaceful solution and to eventually get for the Cuban people their independence. It's also sort of a warning to other European countries that the United States is going to preserve the Monroe Doctrine. Do any of you guys remember the Monroe Doctrine from U.S. History 1? Any recollection of that, Steph?
Is that how the U.S. is supposed to keep expanding? There's that.
Oh, that's close. That's Manifest Destiny. Okay? The Monroe Doctrine stated that the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, are closed to European colonization. Therefore, if any European country tries to interfere in this hemisphere, it would be considered an act of war by the United States. Okay? So the U.S. sends the USS Maine there, but one night the boat blows up. Okay? What do you think the yellow press is going to say about the Maine blowing up? AJ.
It's like an act of war.
It's an act of war. That the Spanish did it deliberately. That is not actually the case. The latest evidence that we have points to an internal explosion on the battleship. I've already stated, how do these ships get around? Steam. What's the problem with steam as a power source? Marilyn?
so you have these like bowls, power source, which is like having a furnace.
You have a big furnace in the bottom of your ship. What turns the pistons and the turbines? Pressure. And if the pressure is not released, the ship can blow up. What they believe happened is that on board, they've looked at the wreckage of the Maine, and they believe that there was a party on board the USS Maine that night. There was drinking, and the guy who should have been watching the steam room was not. He was busy playing cards and drinking, and then the ship blew up on its own. Okay? But the fact that it blew up because the sailors weren't paying attention doesn't change American. Oh, we already talked about that. Here you see one of the yellow papers of the world. It's okay. So the U.S. gives Spain an ultimatum. Does anyone know what an ultimatum is?
Like a this or that.
Yeah, do this or else. And the this is give Cuban independence or else. Spain declines. It says no. And well, there's also something going on in the background. A secret letter written by a Spanish minister by the name of Delon said this: "We're not worried about this ultimatum from President McKinley. You see, we believe that President McKinley has a spine like a chocolate eclair." You ever had a chocolate eclair? They are tasty, but they don't have a lot of backbone. The yellow press discover this secret letter, and how do you think the public is going to respond to that? Here you have the Spanish not only allegedly blowing up an American ship, but insulting the President of the United States. It's going to anger a lot of people. So, President McKinley declares war, quote, "in the name of humanity." It is, as wars go, an absolute joke. It was called the Splendid Little War by the U.S. Secretary of State John Hay, and it was splendid in that it was only about 3 months long. We only lose in the Spanish-American War about 300 people in battle. Most of the people who actually die in the Spanish-American War die from bad meat, because it was before the passage of the Food and Drug Act. The other people who die of something called yellow fever. From the Spanish-American War, we have a group of soldiers known as the Rough Riders. Theodore Roosevelt was the Undersecretary of the Navy. He pushed for and got the declaration of war. Here's a recreation of the Rough Riders on horseback. Notice the copyright. Did you see the copyright on the screen? It was 1903. So this is 5 years after the end of the Spanish-American War. But
Is that the real one?
those are the real Rough Riders, yeah. Theodore Roosevelt's in the front with the flag. Now, what Theodore Roosevelt does at this battle called the Battle of San Juan Hill is he goes up a steep hill against a heavily armed Spanish foe and takes this hill. And the battle was pretty famous in that it resulted in a big U.S. victory, but mainly it was because Theodore Roosevelt, we talked about this in the last unit, was so good at public relations, he managed to convince Joseph Pulitzer that what he did might have been the most amazing accomplishment in the history of warfare. And so all these papers back in the United States were publicizing what TR did on horseback. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.